Year after year, we see Apple release new iPhones, and more recently, they haven't been dramatically different from the model that preceded it. In fact, it's been actually a long time since the company released an iPhone that brought some truly exciting features. With the new iPhone 15 and 15 Pro, it may seem on the surface that we're looking at more of the same, but quietly though, for the first time in a long time, I'm actually kind of excited. Now with the iPhone 15 Pro series, particularly the iPhone 15 Pro Max, we're seeing Apple kind of close the gap between itself and the competitors on the Android side of things. It's introducing things like an action button, which we have seen on some Android phones before. We are seeing this year USB-C charging, as well as 5x optical zoom on the Pro Max. But that doesn't diminish what it means for the iPhone 15 Pro series. The iPhone 15 Pro Max seems to be shaping up to be one of the most meaningful updates in years. Let's start with the feature that not only did I spend the most time testing, but is also something I think will make the most impact on your day-to-day life. And that's cameras. So let's begin by laying out the actual specs. First, you've got the main 48 megapixel sensor, and it's accompanied by, on the Pro Max, 3 other options. You've got 12 megapixel ultra-wide, 12 megapixel 2x telephoto, and 12 megapixel 5x telephoto. The main difference between the Pro and the Pro Max is that that latter 5x option is absent on the regular Pro model. I compared the iPhone 15 Pro Max to the Galaxy S23 Ultra and the Pixel 7 Pro. Now, just on specs, the Google handset and Apple's are the closest to compare with each other because Samsung's actually goes up to 10x optical zoom and its third option is 3x as opposed to 2x. While that did make for some kind of tricky testing and comparing the photos next to each other, it did give me a good idea of what you can achieve with all 3 phones and what the best one is. But first, let's compare the iPhone 15 Pro Max to its predecessor, the iPhone 14 Pro Max, which actually only got up to a 3x optical zoom. Honestly, the differences were only really clear when I zoomed in to a close-up picture of a back of a bus. In the photo taken with the older phone, you can tell there's characters there, but you can't really see what the words are. Meanwhile, on the photo taken with the iPhone 15 Pro Max, you can see and have a better idea of what each of those characters are, and you can sort of guess at the words. So if you're considering upgrading from a 14 Pro Max to a 15 Pro Max, just bear in mind that the difference isn't huge. But now back to the zooming face-off between Apple and its Android competitors. Honestly, after evaluating my copious pictures of things from far away, I can't tell you who the clear winner is. I mean, of course, Samsung has a bit of an advantage in getting closer to things from further away, but at the same zoom levels, they're all basically the same. In some cases, the Pixel did a little bit better, it retained detail more clearly, whereas the iPhone tended to be a little bit aggressive with its HDR processing. Look at these pictures side by side and compare them for yourselves. There's pictures of birds, horses, and deer in Comset State Park. The zoom levels on these, I have tried to keep them consistent. I'm sure, like myself, you can't tell what the clear winner is. All I can say is it's actually just nice to see Apple finally kind of catch up to the competition on the Android side of things. Another crucial part of the camera experience that Apple actually upgraded this time for the iPhone 15 series is portraits. The company says it uses a new depth map to better sort of understand where things are in the scene and outline them and give you depth effects. So you can use portrait mode in all 3 of these phones to shoot things close up and have an artificial depth of field effect. And I've, in the past, always struggled with Apple's implementation of this. I just love the way Google's done it in the past. I've always found Samsung to be a little bit too aggressive and artificial. And in my testing with the iPhone 15 Pro Max, the Pixel 7 Pro, and the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra, the Pixel still wins, basically, although Samsung is a close second this time. Apple may have improved some of its algorithm and some of its editing capabilities, but somehow the results are still hit or miss. If you look at this picture of sprinkles on a mound of ice cream, what the hell is Apple doing here? I don't really get it. It seems like a fluke, and I haven't, really replicated this exact same problem in the iPhone 15 Pro Max's portrait mode again. But it's also always a struggle to find the right distance away from my subject with the iPhone to take a portrait-enabled picture. Meanwhile, with the Pixel and the Galaxy S23, I don't really have to, position myself in such a specific spot. I really just point and shoot, and the phone does a lot of the other work for me. If you don't want to struggle with iPhone's portrait mode all day, but you still kind of want that artificial depth of field effect, you can use the regular photo mode. And as long as you're taking photos of something like a person, cats, or dogs, the camera will automatically capture depth information so that you can go into the photo editor afterwards and still tweak depth information to get that sort of light blur in the background. This also enables you to change the focal point and have subjects in the background be clear while things in the foreground are a little bit blurry. So when the iPhone does recognize that a person, cat, or dog is in the scene, this does work. You can go in and hit the edit button and see on the bottom left that there is a F icon that means you can edit portrait mode. When you are taking the photo, the f-stop icon or indicator will also show up to let you know that the iPhone's recognized a subject in the scene that is compatible with that system. But it doesn't work all the time. I think there are some obvious situations where there is a person in the scene, like me with shades on, or maybe bits of my head are cut off, but I'm still there, it's still my face, and the iPhone did not detect there was a person there, and I was not able to afterwards adjust the depth effect. I do like, however, that this works with both the rear cameras and the selfie cameras. So it's been nice to kind of play around with the selfies I've taken with the iPhone and apply a nice little background blur. Apple's actually improved its night mode this time with a little bit clearer details at night with some better exposure, but Google still has the upper hand here. It just is so much better at retaining information even in the shadows and not overexposing lights in the scene. For more details, go to our written review on Engadget.com to check out a photo sample library, and feel free to hit me up on Threads. I am at Shirley Instagram. For now though, my main takeaway is this. Apple's cameras have come a long way and they continue to improve slightly over the years. There are other things like the fact that the new photos on the iPhone default to 24 megapixels as resolution. There are different zoom levels like 24, 28, and 35 millimeter crops or focal lengths. They're just handy little shortcuts. So for all the details, once again, go to check out the written review on Engadget.com. Moving on now to another thing that's long been available in the Android world, USB-C charging. On the 15 Pro and the Pro Max, you'll get data transfers at USB 3.0, which means you can go up to 10 gigabits per second of data transfers. And you get fast charging with compatible 27-watt chargers at the same speeds as before, which is 50% in about 30 minutes. Each new iPhone 15 comes with a 1 meter woven USB-C cable in the box, but they won't support USB 3.0 data transfer rates. One thing that USB-C does enable that was kind of quickly glossed over during the keynote is that the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max now support USB power delivery, which means you can actually use the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max to charge other devices via USB-C. On the Pro Max especially, this is a very nice feature to have because that thing does not run out of juice, and you can always use it to charge up your AirPods Pro case, say if you're on a long camping trip. Now that charging happens at a rate of only 4.5 watts, so don't expect anything magical to happen. You may have to sit for an hour to see even like a 10 to 20% increase, but at least it's there and it's nice to have. The action button was a real surprise for me when Apple introduced it last week. I wasn't expecting us to get rid of the mute slider. I wasn't even expecting to apparently be in the minority of people who still uses the mute slider. The action button is something that you can, with a long press, trigger things from changing your profile from mute to ring, launching the flashlight, starting a voice memo, starting the camera, launching an accessibility feature, a magnifier, and more. The ability to set this to launch the camera quickly is nice. It's a lot easier, I will say, than having to long press on the camera icon on the lock screen or swipe in, but it is also a little bit tricky, especially on a phone as large as the Pro Max, to reach for the top left with one hand. I think I almost dropped the phone a couple of times trying to do this. I will say, for my purposes, it worked well. It launched the camera every time I needed it, and I was able to actually more quickly launch the camera and photograph some really finicky deer because I had the action button on hand. But if you're not as, fascinated with wildlife photography as I am, then you can also set it to do any number of other things. And I think the most intriguing for me, as somewhat of a programming nerd sometimes, is shortcuts. I mean, shortcuts has existed forever. You can use it to program all sorts of automated processes on the iPhone, and being able to map action button to a shortcut that you can create is potentially incredibly helpful. I think we've yet to unlock what the action button can do, and I've really only used it for close to a week. It remains to be seen in the long run how useful this really is. I will say, those people who are telling me that Android has had this button forever, no Android handset I've tested so far really allows you to map a dedicated button to as many permutations of things as action button has been able to so far. Finally, we're moving on to the last main feature that has me excited for the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max, and is the one on this list that has not been done yet on the Android side of things. This is titanium. This new material makes the iPhone Pro Max a lot lighter and a little bit smaller than before. And though the iPhone 15 Pro Max is a little bit thicker than the iPhone 14 Pro Max, its contoured edges give it the illusion of being thinner. It's also got ever so slightly thinner bezels than before, and this is the most noticeable in the corners of the display. And that's kind of how Apple was able to shave down some of those fractions of inches from the overall chassis. I've yet to drop this phone, so I can't tell you how hardy really this titanium, this grade 5 aerospace grade titanium really is. I do like the way it feels in my hand though. It's very smooth, but I am bored by the colors. There's a lot of other new things in the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max, including the A17 Pro chip, which enables hardware accelerated ray tracing in games like Resident Evil Village that is coming on a console level to the iPhone 15 Pros. There's also an upgraded second generation ultra wideband chip. There's features that are in iOS 17 like standby, improved Siri, dictation. For all the details and how those meaningfully impact your life, make sure to read my full review as well as Matt Smith's full review of iOS 17 on Engadget.com. And for videos on all of that stuff, as well as more fun stuff on the world of consumer technology, make sure you subscribe to Engadget. Until next time, USBC's the day. Carpe diem.